This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to Coronial, everyone. I'm Georgie.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Alice.
This week, I'm going to be discussing an inquest that involves the death of a First Nations Gamilaroi man. While the inquest does provide his name, I'm going to not refer to him by this name, as my understanding is that in Aboriginal culture, the name of a deceased person is often not mentioned to ensure that their spirit is not prevented from progressing in their journey. We may or may not have covered other inquests that discuss First Nations individuals, but this is the first one that it has been highlighted up front of the ones that I've read, and also any of the media reports I found also did not mention the man's name in respect of these traditions, and so I wish to pay my respects to that as well.
Yep.
However, I did find the case a compelling issue that was worth discussing in order to advocate for change, and so hence I did still want to present it rather than avoiding presenting it because of that issue.
Yep.
The man was 53 years of age when he died of metastatic pancreatic cancer. The inquest into his death was mandatory, as at the time of his death he was an inmate in a correctional facility. A little bit about his background. He was a man that was the eldest of 9 children and had lived mostly on Gamilaroi, and I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Gadigal lands over his life. And these are otherwise known as Gunnedah and Sydney. The man was married and had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. The youngest of his daughters was his next of kin for the purposes of communication between the prison staff and medical staff and the rest of the man's family. And so that will become relevant throughout this story. In early February 2021, the man was sentenced to a term of 6 years and 6 months imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 3 years and 6 months. The inquest didn't provide any further detail about this conviction, so I don't have any further detail about that.
Okay.
And it's not relevant. When first taken into custody, he was placed in a precautionary isolation. This was in February 2021. It was due to COVID-19 protocols. And then after that transferred to a remand centre in outer Sydney, and then was transferred to a minimum security correctional centre 2 hours out of Sydney. And so in order to differentiate between the one that is outer Sydney and 2 hours out, the remand centre is the one in the city, and the correctional centre is the one that's further out, just for ease of delineating between the two.
Yep.
I'll try to be consistent. At the time of remand, the man was noted to have diabetes, peripheral neuropathy, and chronic pancreatitis as medical diagnoses. As part of the care for inmates with chronic medical conditions, routine blood tests were ordered and completed for the man on the 12th of July 2022. So this is about a year after he's entered the correctional centre. So I assume this is just like an annual checkup type situation. And nothing was detailed about the earlier period. Blood test results were reviewed by a medical officer 6 weeks later, on the 22nd of August 2022.
That's a long time between having the blood test and it being reviewed.
Correct.
A really, really long time.
A little longer than I would have thought would be ideal.
I would say a week would be reasonable.
Turns out they had a 14-day policy. So 2 weeks. They gave you 2 weeks.
They gave you 2 weeks to review it, or the results only came back after 2 weeks?
No. 2 weeks to review it.
Okay.
I don't know how long they would have taken, but I can only assume that they were relatively routine and, allowing for transport, maybe like out of a prison, etc. Maybe give it an extra couple of days than the general pathology service, but I would have thought it'd still be within a few days.
Yep.
For like routine annual bloods, if you take a little bit of time to review them, like a couple of weeks is probably not unreasonable if you're not expecting to find anything abnormal. Then, it's part of that routine preventative care.
It's not as though something's wrong and you're getting a blood test because you're feeling unwell.
Yeah, exactly.
For whatever reason.
Unfortunately, the results showed an abnormality in the man's liver functioning. As a result, a repeat blood test and abdominal ultrasound were recommended by the medical officer that reviewed them.
Yep.
However, at the time of the blood test review, or the results review, the man was isolated as a result of a COVID-19 infection at the remand centre in Outer Sydney. So he wasn't at his usual correctional facility.
Why was he in the remand centre, do you know? Or was it
Isolation. So he needed isolation
yeah,
because of COVID, and they
Yep.
didn't have isolation options within the correctional facility out of Sydney, so they had to move them into the other remand centre where there were isolation areas available.
Which makes sense. I mean, with the remand, I think that's usually where they keep people for like their court appearances.
Yeah.
things
It's
like
definitely a closer location that's just for temporary housing.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so
Yep.
And they're single cells rather than
a cell block or a cell
Yeah,
house. Like I think he was located in like a house where they all lived together and
Mhm.
had the ability to leave their room, after hours, but they were
yes.
locked within the house.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And presumably with COVID, etc., they just had to do what they could in terms of isolating people, etc.
Yeah, I'd never actually thought about what COVID was like in the prisons.
Yeah,
Not
me
great.
neither.
Not
It would have
great.
been,
Yeah.
it would have been really
bad.
difficult.
Basically, there were a lot of places where you just couldn't really isolate people because you just didn't have the ability to. And so it was just like once it got into the prison,
Yeah.
it got into everyone. And, there are people that might be elderly, that might have really high risk, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Anyway. So no record was found to indicate that the man was informed of the blood test results or the request for the abdominal ultrasound. He's off isolated. No one told him.
Yep. And so the medical officer who did that, where did their recommendations go? To the health staff at the prison?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's like a regular nurse that does like chronic care.
Yep.
So they have like, however often check-ins and etc. And that person would have just been like, yep, when the man comes back, organise this stuff.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of days after return from the isolation, the man was told of his need to transfer to Sydney to undergo the abdominal ultrasound. So there's no medical facilities at the correction centre, so please go back into Sydney, even though you've just come 2 hours out of Sydney, in order to have this ultrasound.
Mm.
The man declined to attend this appointment as he'd not been informed about the transfer and did not want to go. And I think that's fair.
Can't make people go.
And also, it doesn't go into whether the results, like the blood test results themselves, were really gone into in any level of detail. Did they give him the reason why he needed this abdominal ultrasound?
There is no evidence that he was informed of the reason he needed the abdominal ultrasound.
Yeah, he was just been told, you're going here and doing this. And
Go get an ultrasound. And he's like, I've just got back from isolation. I don't feel like going on another road trip. Thank you, but no.
Yeah.
The repeat blood test was completed on the 5th of September, so like a few days after.
Okay.
While being seen by the nurse with regards to his diabetes on the 27th of September, so another 3 weeks later, the man was noted to be jaundice, which is the yellowing discoloration of skin and the whites of the eyes that can be seen as a result of abnormal liver function. This was noted to have been present for at least 3 days prior to that particular visit. And at that time, the man stated that he'd also been lethargic, and most specifically since his COVID-19 infection.
Which is then a bit of a confounding factor, isn't it? Because
Probably.
post-viral fatigue is really quite common.
Yeah, and I think this sort of implies that he's not really making a fuss of it. Like, it's his routine checkup, and the nurse is like, how you doing? And he's like, meh, not great.
I'm tired since I've had COVID, and it's sort of like, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. But hard to tell,
Mm.
the inquest doesn't go into whether it was a repeated issue or anything like that.
Yep.
So at this point at that review, the nurse then was like, oh, hey, you had blood tests recently, and reviewed those that were taken on the 5th and ultimately determined that the man should be transferred to the local hospital for further review. No evidence was provided to suggest that these results had been reviewed at any time prior to this. So again, this time it wasn't 6 weeks, it was only 3 weeks. But it only also happened because he happened to be being seen as well. It wasn't like there was any routine review of those results.
Right.
So during this hospital review, the man reported symptoms of decreased appetite, abdominal pain just below the rib cage, also known as epigastric pain, and dark urine. The man's medical notes reported that he was jaundice, had a distended abdomen, and this was tender in the upper area just below the rib cage as well, and pain in his lower back. A scan was performed and a mass was identified in the region of his pancreas. He was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the medical notes report that this information was also conveyed to the man's daughter, his next of kin, by phone.
Right.
However, at the inquest, the man's daughter reported that her understanding of this phone call was that her father may have pancreatic cancer, but that the doctors were waiting on test results. And I think that's like a biopsy result.
Yep.
She was also told that she would be informed of these results once they were completed and finalised.
Yep. And, like, to me that makes sense because you've done a scan and you've identified a mass.
Yeah.
That doesn't definitively say that it's cancer.
He had other lesions, metastatic lesions.
Right, okay.
That were highly suggestive.
Yeah.
And essentially it's kind of saying, like, yes, I guess that they couldn't actually definitively give a diagnosis because they don't have results from a biopsy, but, like, it was otherwise pancreatic cancer.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that maybe that's why the daughter was told it wasn't a definite this is cancer, we need to wait for the test results because technically you can't diagnose.
And I think also the wording was talked about a little in it where it's like the doctor said he's got metastatic lesions or whatever, and like that someone may not have actually truly understood that that is a definitive diagnosis or like fairly confirmatory of that disease.
Yeah, the average layperson with no medical knowledge wouldn't know what that means.
Yeah, so I think terminology used, possibly a little bit of denial because we all want to pretend like our parents are going to live forever. You know, like not saying that that's what happened here, but like I could see how you would want to maybe downplay it. And so that I can then also see how the medical person who relayed the information to her thought that they were giving 100% of the story and that she didn't receive 100% of the story.
Yeah. And
that's why it is such a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, because it would get lost in translation.
And often you need to then be like, can you repeat back your understanding of this to me so that you can then determine have you conveyed that information correctly.
Yep.
But you don't always have time to do that, / that's a whole longer conversation.
Yep.
Basically, though, the daughter went away from that being like, we're waiting to hear back.
Yep.
The biopsy was completed on the 29th of September and results were confirmed on the 6th of October, confirming pancreatic cancer.
Right.
These results were not conveyed to the man's daughter or any other member of his family.
Even though they had said that they would tell her when the biopsy results came back.
Correct.
Mm.
And this was like just the local hospital, so not a prison service or anything like that, just so that we're all okay with that. Because following that review at the local hospital, the man briefly returned to the correctional facility prior to them being transferred to Long Bay Hospital. And this is a medical facility for remanded inmates. So this is a hospital prison.
Yep.
Yep.
I think it's located on the same campus as another hospital.
Yeah, right.
But like it's a separate block for remanded inmates.
Yep. And so was the man himself told of the biopsy results?
It's unclear. I think ultimately he ended up knowing he has pancreatic cancer.
Yep. But how that came about.
But also he's a remanded inmate. He can't just call his daughter and be like, hey.
Well, I'm not sure.
I don't think by this point that was easily facilitated.
Yes, so even more reason for them to tell him directly as well as telling his daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll come back to that. I have to double check, but it very much sounds like he was not well informed, at least, as to what was going on.
Yeah, he obviously knew something was wrong, otherwise he wouldn't be going to a prison hospital.
Exactly.
But yeah, the extent of
and again,
knowledge.
his ability to communicate that to anyone else was very limited.
Yeah.
Do you know if there was any sort of cultural or linguistic challenges that may have made it difficult to convey that sort of information to this individual?
It wasn't mentioned that was the case. There was no like obvious health condition that was mentioned, such as an intellectual disability impairment concern.
Mm-hmm.
He had medical conditions that were very common. I mean, he's 53, so not overly common, but like diabetes is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Look, his chronic pancreatitis was due to drug and alcohol dependency, but not that it was made obvious as to why he wouldn't be able to understand. And not that the daughter or the family ever brought up that there'd be a reason why he couldn't understand.
Okay. So it's not that he was English as a second
That's what I
language.
was going to say. He's
Potentially.
proficient in English. I would say English would not be his first language, but whether or not he was proficient in English or not. Like,
Yeah.
Unclear, yeah. He'd lived in Sydney for a period of his life.
Mhm.
So he'd certainly lived in more, like, yes, he came from a regional area, but he'd lived certainly in urban areas in his life and moved around the country a lot. So there would have been enough exposure, I think, to English language.
And the coroner didn't obviously
mention it.
bring it up
Mention it
as being a factor.
Yeah. So man went back to the correctional facility, then headed off to the hospital, which was the remand centre hospital. The eldest daughter of the man was notified of this transfer, noting that the eldest daughter is not the next of kin daughter.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, the family were advised to discuss the father's medical care with the hospital directly rather than with the prison.
Okay.
However, the contact details for the remand centre in Outer Sydney were the ones that were provided to the family, not the contact details for the hospital.
That is really unhelpful.
And the reason being behind that the family weren't told about was that the man had to transfer to that remand centre before then going to the hospital because there wasn't a bed available in the hospital yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the family didn't know that and no one told them that and weren't meant to know. You know, how could they have possibly known that that's the way that system had to work?
Yeah, you're getting stuck in the administrative
nightmare.
Yes.
It's
bureaucratic
only
nightmare.
gonna get worse.
Oh, God.
When contacting the remand centre, the man's daughter was informed that due to privacy reasons, the man's condition could not be discussed. Basically, all they could do was essentially be like, yeah, he's here.
That is so
and even
frustrating.
then, kind of didn't feel super comfortable about that either.
Oh, it's so frustrating for his family.
Mm.
Trying to get information, they're trying to get a hold of him, but they're being
they're not
told
allowed
no.
to. The person they got in contact with said that the reason they couldn't tell them was because the man had not completed a consent to liaise form. And this was essentially the permission privacy regulation that was needed in order for the family to be notified of what's going on.
Had he ever been given this form?
No.
Had this ever been discussed with him?
Nope.
I was going to say, is he even well enough
Able to do it?
to...
That's also a really good question because basically the coroner was like, even when he completed it, it was not well completed. So probably not.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, I don't know what his language skills, literacy skills, or even writing skills, etc.
Health.
But even how well they completed the form with him.
Yeah, or even just like general health. If you're in and out of consciousness because you're a terminally ill cancer patient, you're going to have some trouble filling in a form.
Yep. Look, lots of questions. Lots of questions. Things I cannot answer. This person that was on the phone gave the daughter another phone number in order to contact a client liaison officer. However, this phone call occurred over a weekend, and so that number only went to voicemail. So the daughter then subsequently found the number for the Long Bay Hospital and just tried to call them directly.
Yep, fair.
But again, at that point, the daughter was directed to contact the client liaison officer again. This time she was provided with an email, which also did not help over the weekend.
That's not going to go any... Even on a weekday, that might not go anywhere for a few days.
So while the man was in Long Bay Hospital, he was seen by the palliative care team on the 7th of October, and end-of-life planning was commenced at this point. So yeah, he's getting pretty unwell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On this day, the consent to release health information and consent to liaise forms were provided to the man to complete. And following this, communication with his family was permitted.
Finally.
Don't get too excited. A witness from the Justice Health Network reported at the inquest that typically these forms permitting contact with families were used following the development of a care plan for the inmate. The coroner argued that this was inconsistent with the way the forms were completed. As I said, he didn't complete it particularly well, and undermined an inmate's right to autonomy to have their family involved in care planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, why are you waiting until after the plan is made?
Yeah,
it should be before you make the plan.
The coroner also noted that during generalised medical care, if you're in the community, a family are commonly involved throughout the diagnosis and treatment planning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're probably, I would say, actively encouraged to be involved.
Yep.
It's very difficult when you're being delivered news like this to actually understand and comprehend it. In the best of times, you'd hope that there was some sort of support person there.
Yeah.
And
with
again,
you.
though, he's also a remanded inmate, so his ability to contact his own family is also probably limited because he's terminally unwell
Yep.
and because he probably doesn't have access to a phone immediately after the medical consult. You know, if you have to wait 4 hours, you've probably forgotten everything that was said anyway.
Exactly.
And it was such a blur because you've just been told you have terminal cancer.
Yeah. And again, the reason I want to discuss this one is absolutely around that concept of like, what's your right as an imprisoned inmate? And like, I still fundamentally think that healthcare is a right.
It is.
Yes.
It's a fundamental right.
Even if you are remanded.
Yes.
Versus I get that a lot of people are like, well, you've done something wrong that's required you to be remanded. So like you need to not have as many rights.
People
but
wouldn't
like,
say the same thing if they were talking about their mother or father who was in prison.
Yeah.
I guarantee, or their
Yeah.
sister or brother or child,
But
they'd have a
also-
different view.
people should die with dignity. And so you need to give them the right to have that dignified death. And if you don't help them through their medical care, that is unable to happen. Anyway,
yeah.
that's my
fair.
frustration. So yeah, so the forms were useless. Well, not useless. They were useful, but like they weren't used well.
Yeah, they were inappropriately used.
So 3 days after completing the consent to liaise form, on the 10th of October, the man was then transferred to the Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney. Now, this is a proper tertiary hospital, and this is not a prison-related service. He's gone to another general community hospital, but they do have an inmate wing,
Oh,
I
okay.
believe. But even then, like, hospitals still take inmates. They just have them isolated and
Yeah.
Usually
remanded.
there's extra precautions.
yeah, guarded. Yeah. So for this transfer, his eldest son was notified that the transfer was required.
And they're just going through the list of family members at
Yes.
this point.
Yeah.
They just like inconsistently contacted whoever they wanted.
Ugh.
So yeah, the eldest son was notified that the transfer was required so that the man could undergo a surgical procedure. Only once he'd already arrived there anyway.
And did they tell them what the surgical procedure was?
Yeah, so then, you know, the son was like, don't call me, call the next of kin. So then they contacted the actual next of kin in order to provide consent for the procedure that he'd already been transferred to a hospital for. And I'm like, well, it's not really consent then, is it? Well, it's not informed consent because you've kind of got them all there already. It kind of implies like this is going to happen.
She hadn't.
It doesn't
even-
feel as voluntary anymore.
Yes. It
Yeah.
feels like you need to say yes now because he's already here. We're about to do it.
Yeah. She's not seen him. So like in
Yeah.
terms of her ability to consent on his behalf, she's not had an ability to, I don't
To
know if
speak
she's
to
had
him.
the ability to contact him, talk to him directly, to see
Understand,
his
like, what
condition, to understand
he
his
wants.
need, to understand what he wants.
Yeah.
So many concerns about the consent process that weren't even brought up in the inquest because it was like the least of the worries.
And this is probably not something you know, and potentially not something that's anything to do with this inquest. But I'm assuming prisoners or people who are in custody have the ability to sign things like do not resuscitate orders
Yeah.
and things
they-
like that.
Well, again, they should
Yeah.
have their own right to all of their medical care. This was the first time the daughter had been contacted since the 2nd of October when she learnt her father was being transferred to Long Bay Hospital, and 3 days since he'd completed the consent to liaise form. Following providing consent for the procedure, the daughter attempted to arrange to visit her father. During her contact with Long Bay Hospital, she was provided with a number for the Department of Community Justice. This number was not operational.
Oh, come on.
At one point, the daughter did receive a phone call from her father, but she reported at the inquest that during this call, he was so unwell, he was delirious.
Oh.
In order to be able to visit her father, the daughter ultimately contacted the Office of the Minister for Correctional Services.
Wow.
Following this, she was contacted by a manager at the Long Bay Hospital and provided with the contact details for the oncology team at the Prince of Wales Hospital, the team caring for her father. She was then also permitted by this manager to visit her father and bring one of her brothers as well.
Okay.
So a son and a daughter were able to visit
Yep.
him. This visit occurred on the 13th of October. And at the inquest, the daughter reported that this was a positive visit. Unfortunately, though, at this time, the man was so unwell that he was unable to participate in planned calls with other family members. And so he's really starting to deteriorate by this point.
Yeah.
During this visit, the man's daughter was able to meet with the oncology team caring for him. But following the visit, due to a lack of accommodation in Sydney, the man's daughter returned to Gunnedah, 400 kilometres away. And this is where she resides.
Yeah, fair. And I can't imagine that accommodation nearby would have been particularly cost effective either.
No, accommodation in
It's
Sydney
Sydney.
is wild.
Especially last minute,
And
Yeah.
Prince of Wales is like, it's
right in the middle.
Yeah,
very
Sydney
central
CBD is
Sydney.
very
Yeah.
expensive.
yeah. The next time the daughter was able to visit was on the 15th and 16th of October, and these fell as a Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
During these visits, guards refused to allow her to sit next to her father. Phone calls were not permitted, even though they had been previously approved. And she was not permitted to bring personal items into her father's room, such as her own mobile phone or pictures she'd brought to show him.
Oh, that is so sad.
She made like a photo board for him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which is such a lovely thing to do for someone who's stuck in hospital, can't see their family, and is about to die.
He's been a prison inmate. He hasn't been able to see people for
Yeah.
over 12 months. Or like,
Don't know what the
people can visit
visitation was,
minimum
yeah,
security,
but-
blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah. But like, you know
but-
what I mean? Like his exposure to his family is already limited by the fact
Probably
that
Yeah.
he's
not
an
had like a
inmate.
hug
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a very long time.
Yeah.
So this restriction of various things continued even when the daughter attempted to provide an email that confirmed that she'd been provided permission for these activities.
Mm.
Yeah, right. So the guys were just like, no,
Yeah.
don't care what happened previously. We're not allowing it now.
Well, no, she had an email saying when you visit on this day, you will be
Oh.
permitted to take your phone in, to,
To-
you know, be close to him, to bring
Yep.
photos in. And they were
And
like,
they were still just...
nah, against our policy, sorry.
That is
I
bullshit.
don't understand what the harm is
Yeah, there is none.
in doing that, so it just doesn't make sense.
I can see how there may be a risk if you were the person who was in hospital was otherwise fit and well except for they had a broken arm or something. And maybe they were then an escape risk. But this is
Yeah.
a terminally ill person
Yeah.
who I doubt is able to get out of their bed at all.
I don't know. This is where I get frustrated with things. I understand there are policies in place for certain things and for good reason, as we have discussed many a time
Yep.
in these episodes, but sometimes there's doing what's right in terms of a policy, and then there's doing what's right. As in having
compassion.
some
For a
sort of
person.
compassion. And
Human
sometimes they're not the
decency.
same. Sometimes they're not the same thing.
Mm.
And that's okay.
And I think for me, ultimately it's the daughter that's remaining alive after this. And that's her last memories of her father.
Yeah.
But he deserves to die in a place that is as comfortable as possible. I understand he has committed a crime. He is serving his sentence. I understand all of that. But that doesn't take away the fact that he deserves to die in a place that's comfortable with some sort of compassion.
Yeah.
Yep.
But she deserves also to be able to have that nice memory with
And
him.
say goodbye to her father properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do her siblings or anyone else that's related to him or anyone else that wants to come visit him.
Mm.
You know, and she had to fight so hard to get herself there.
Yeah.
Like, I don't imagine anyone else was given permission.
And the fact that he's in a minimum security prison or was
Yeah.
Yeah.
suggests to me, and I know we don't know what he was sentenced for, but it suggests to me that he's probably there for a non-violent crime.
Yeah. I don't understand the reasoning
Yeah.
behind not permitting him a decent death.
If this had happened, so say he served his full sentence,
Yeah.
or even served a sentence and then was released on parole, and then this happened immediately afterwards, he still committed a crime. The only difference is that he's currently serving, like he would be
He's currently
afforded so much more
incarcerated.
dignity if he had finished or was technically
parole.
released
Yeah.
on
And
parole.
aren't a lot of people released on compassionate grounds when
Yes.
they get to this point
Yeah.
as well? Like, I wonder why that wasn't considered in this case.
It never got that far.
Yeah.
But I agree, it should have been considered. As
Absolutely.
early as when he got the diagnosis on
Yep.
the 27th or whatever of September.
Yep.
And we're now at the 15th, 16th of October. That experience was so draining for the daughter that she wasn't able to return to see her father. She just sort of stepped away and went, I cannot do that again.
Which is so devastating for him, and it's not her fault.
Yeah.
But that's so devastating for him.
When she detailed her experience to the correctional services manager at the Long Bay Hospital, the reply email stated, and this is a quote, "Please understand that we're doing everything we can to assist you and your father in this difficult time
Bullshit.
for you and your family." Yeah, look, I feel the same. "But sometimes communication breaks down when it's outside of our normal procedure. I hope this gives you some clarification."
No,
That gives no clarification. Sorry, we're shit at communicating.
but sometimes we're bad at it.
Because it's outside of our normal procedures.
Because we don't really communicate well anyway.
But, like,
So-
are you saying this is the first inmate that's ever had terminal care? Like, what do you mean it's not a normal
Yeah.
procedure? You saying you don't have a procedure for when inmates are unwell in hospital? What?
Or even, inmates unwell in hospital and they are terminal. That would
Yeah.
absolutely happen.
and they have family members that want to visit them.
Anyway, as the week progressed, the daughter was able to speak to her father once more over the phone, and therefore she then considered returning to him to visit over the coming weekend. Obviously, in the context of, like, she has her own life, job, employment,
Yeah.
Family.
5 hours away, etc.
Yeah.
In attempting to do that, she was told that she would have to call between 8 and 9 a.m. on the morning that she planned to visit
What?
to see if she was approved,
No!
despite the fact that they knew she lived 5 hours away.
Because you call between those hours and you're still at home, and then you drive all that way and they're like, sorry, visiting hours are over.
Or
Or you drive all the way
leave,
there,
and then they say, actually, no, you're not approved.
so you just have to turn around and go home again.
Anyway, unfortunately, the man passed away at 4:52 a.m. on the Saturday, the 22nd of October, 2022.
So before 8 or 9 a.m.
of
the
the
day
morning that she
could
was,
visit.
the day that
That
she was
is-
going to visit.
oh, that's horrible.
I think, yeah, that timing as well is just extra
hard.
heartbreaking and horrendous.
And I'm hoping that this didn't happen, but did she only find out that he had died when she called between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. to ask if she could visit?
It didn't say, however, the coroner did note in the inquest findings that in contrast to the difficulties the man's daughter had in obtaining information and support in attempt to spend time with her father prior to his death, she received an overwhelming number of phone calls in the aftermath of his death.
Oh,
I know, how many swear words do you want to say?
so many.
There needs to just be a continuous bleep here.
Yes.
The coroner found this to be unacceptable.
Yeah, fair.
And I agreed.
Yes.
I just cannot comprehend why there would needed to have been an excessive amount of contact with the daughter after.
Maybe it's because that was in their procedure.
I hope it was them just apologising profusely.
Oh, I doubt it.
I mean, this is very foreseeable that this could happen. I just don't think,
Yeah.
At that point, I would be like, too late.
Well, I wouldn't be answering the phone.
Yeah, fair.
I'd be like, no, you had your go.
Yeah.
But she probably had to deal with stuff like
Yeah, she would have had to
You
have
absolutely would have had to.
organising
What to do with his
funeral
body.
arrangements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what to do with his possessions that were still in the correction centre.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, like, although, again, knowing that he had terminal cancer and this was the trajectory that he was going on, and quickly as well, she probably wasn't even given the opportunity to start thinking about, or at least putting actions in place for those sorts of things. Because
Yeah.
it doesn't just happen. Like, people don't just die and then magically they're buried.
Yes.
Like, there is a series of steps that has to happen that the family has to arrange. And
Yep.
she probably wasn't afforded the opportunity to even think
to
about,
that.
consider, sign forms, get those things organised.
Discuss
either.
with him in
Discuss
any
with
way.
him what he wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the issues identified in this coronial investigation included whether the man's health was monitored and treated in accordance with applicable standards and policies while he was in custody, and the adequacy of the contact and communication with the man's family following his diagnosis, and then including in relation to the end-of-life visits for him. Spoiler, they weren't adequate.
Yeah, I could tell you that.
So, medical care provided. The coroner found that the man's medical care was inadequate.
Yes.
The coroner was critical of the failure to monitor and respond to the abnormal blood results in a timely manner.
Mhm.
As we mentioned, the review policy that was in place at the time of the man's death indicated abnormal blood results were to be reviewed within a 14-day period. I find that one hard because, like, well, how do you know if they're abnormal?
Yeah, you don't know they're abnormal until you review them.
Yeah.
So I think it should just be that blood tests should be reviewed within 14 days.
Yep.
Furthermore, the coroner was critical that there was no evidence that the results were even discussed with the man. And the coroner stated that if advising the patient is not part of a sign-off procedure for abnormal blood results, then it ought to be. I was like, yes, that
I
seems
agree.
fair. Following the man's death, the New South Wales Justice Health Network updated their policy review process. A daily review of all pathology results is now required, and abnormal results and care plans must be provided to the nursing staff within the centre that inmate resides.
Yeah.
So potentially they must have like a central review procedure, and then that person then has to contact out to the other people.
Yep.
And a process for immediate review and action of critical results has also been implemented. So if there's anything that requires like today action, today action happens. The coroner noted that when the plan for the abdominal ultrasound was made, the man was already isolated at the remand centre, which is much closer to the Long Bay Hospital, where the ultrasound would have occurred. And hence, this should have just been organised while he was there prior to his return to the correctional centre.
Yes.
And this may have had an impact on the man's refusing on the grounds that he did not want to be transferred for the appointment.
Yep.
Additionally, the coroner highlighted that this decision to decline was not an informed decision, given there was no evidence to suggest the purpose of the ultrasound was ever explained to the man. So I think that was actually what you were asking earlier, and I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Can confirm, was not.
He was
not
just
ever
told
discussed.
you need to go have an ultrasound.
Yep.
From the place that we've just brought you back from.
Not quite the same place, but
like
close enough.
essentially, yeah.
That being said, the coroner did conclude that an earlier diagnosis was unlikely to have changed the outcome.
Yeah.
However, they emphasised that someone's incarceration should not preclude appropriate access to their own medical information.
No shit.
Additionally, the delay in discussion and diagnosis may have prevented earlier access to palliative care, his family from spending more time with him, and the potential for an early release or relocation to be explored. And this specifically in the context of a First Nations man was highlighted that no one was ever able to explore with him his desire to die on country. Or whether he had a desire to die on country.
Yeah.
Or like even just other traditional customs that there might be around death and the death process.
Absolutely.
Or even just going home to where his daughter was and the rest of
Yeah.
his family was. Whether or not that
was his birthplace.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
like that was his home country.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of how I got involved in it. Like it exploded in the media in terms of all of the headlines were like, man denied right to die on home country. And I'm like,
I feel
well,
like I remember this.
he wasn't necessarily denied the right. It's just that no one
He was
ever
never
considered
offered
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's really hard to then draw that conclusion because it doesn't state whether that's what he wanted.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, I was like, I don't think you can push that point.
Headlines a little bit, but yeah.
His genuine desire might have been like, I'd prefer to die in a hospital where I'm
yeah,
getting
absolutely.
the palliative care. So like,
Yeah.
it's really hard to.
The question was never asked. So
Yes.
you can't say that it was denied.
Yeah.
There's no evidence to say it had ever been
Yeah.
discussed.
Yep.
The adequacy of the contact and communication with the man's family.
Poor.
Not great. The evidence provided at the inquest highlighted the difficulties faced by the man's family in obtaining helpful and accurate information in relation to his condition, and the barriers that they faced in supporting him at the end of his life. The man's diagnosis was known from the 28th of September, yet it wasn't confirmed with the man's family until the 10th of October. Furthermore, no effective point of contact was provided to the family in order to seek further information. So they were never given, like, when you want to know stuff, here is the one person you can call who will then find how to get that information for you, rather than you having to go to that place, a non-operational number, an email address, a phone that doesn't operate on the weekends, etc.
Yeah.
Barely even knowing where their father actually is.
Yeah, which I assume is what the liaison officer is meant to be there for. they're meant to be that point of contact to get you that information.
Yeah,
I
but
would
it doesn't sound
assume-
like that was really their role. It really never went into, like, that was actually what they were meant to do.
Yeah, right. And I mean, obviously, it didn't work because they were not contactable on the weekend.
I think it's the bit that it took me a while to really understand is, like, that there very much seems to have been a separation between the correctional services and the justice health network,
Yeah.
in the sense that the prison is there to do the prisoning and the health is there to do the health.
Mhm.
Yep.
And so they were given, like, the liaison from the correction
Yeah.
side of it, and that
Who doesn't have the health information?
or the knowledge of the health system necessarily. I don't know how else they get involved. And so I think that for me is like, no, it needed to be a health contact liaison, not
Yes.
a corrections person.
Yep.
So they were provided with all those unhelpful options instead. The coroner was critical that the man's family were not contacted when he was transferred to Long Bay, given that a clinician would have been required to make the decision and would have therefore been best placed to also discuss the reason why he was being transferred. As that had been to the close by hospital, came back to the correctional centre, and then they went, nah, you're too sick to be here.
Yeah.
Please go to hospital.
Yep.
And it's like, someone had to have made that decision, but never informed any of the family about that.
Yep.
The coroner found that the New South Wales Justice Health Network should have completed the consent to release information and consent to liaise forms at the time that they should have informed the man of the abnormal blood results. So he had the blood results in July. They weren't checked to August. Realistically, they should have checked them in July. And at that point, they should have been considering the consent to liaise forms.
Yes. Because they had identified there was a problem.
Yeah, and at that point, they didn't know how serious it was. But it's like, this person has a chronic illness that we've now identified something else and new.
And they might want to contact their family members.
Yeah, we should allow that to be discussed outside of the prison if that's what the man wants. And then the coroner also went on to suggest that, well, if you are doing this, then, you know, maybe if it's something that they have ongoing, if it's not in the context of terminal illness, that could be something that's like updated when he has his chronic care plan done like once a year. That kind of stuff to ensure that that's still what they want, that the next of kin's still correct, all that kind of stuff. And that's not unreasonable to do. The coroner therefore recommended to the New South Wales Justice Health Network that they consider requiring clinicians consult with an inmate to see if they wish to provide a consent to liaise form for the ability to contact next of kin as soon as possible after an inmate receives an advanced cancer diagnosis or starts receiving palliative care. And ideally, this should occur prior to a transfer to a hospital such as Long Bay Hospital, and if not done prior, on arrival. So just be better about it and the communication.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, that any inmate with a chronic condition, that it could also be completed in that context and then reviewed yearly.
Mm-hmm.
The Justice Health Network New South Wales submitted against the making of these recommendations, citing that it is the responsibility of the inmate to keep their family appraised of any medical issues and a healthcare facility's obligation to maintain patient confidentiality. The coroner found that this failed to consider the realities faced by an unwell patient in a custodial setting.
Mm-hmm.
The coroner furthered this statement by highlighting that in this particular case, the terminally ill man was not communicated with himself, so it defies belief that in these circumstances he could have been expected to update his family as to the status of his condition.
Yes.
So it's like, you're taking away other liberties, so you then should still be providing them with the right to assist with what would have been provided in the community.
Yes.
And so I think that's not unreasonable. I think more could have been addressed. Like, this coroner definitely could have made many more recommendations.
Yeah, right.
But those are just hitting on the absolute top priorities.
Yeah. The most glaring issues.
Yeah.
But not all of them.
So in terms of the end-of-life visits, the Commissioner of the Corrective Services New South Wales noted at the inquest that developing arrangements relating to visiting end-of-life and palliative care inmates is uncommon. They said something around like maybe 10 prisoners a year in the state. So like...
Okay, I'd accept uncommon, but not never happens.
Yeah, but it's still enough that you should do something about it. The visit approval process for hospitalised inmates involved the passing on of approvals given by an authorised officer to a senior officer or the functional manager of the medical unit, who would then provide the relevant information to officers on guard duty by phone. The approvals were not documented, as I said, passed on by phone call, and may or may not have included noting on a relevant daily log sheet.
May or may not have.
Yeah. It says may have been included on a relevant daily log sheet, so, like, unclear. Additionally, the custodial operations policy and procedure, which outlines medical escort visits, did not detail how approval is conveyed. So it was just like, inmates might get approval for visits. The end.
Cool.
Right.
It was unclear what caused the breakdown of the system to occur during the weekend that the man's daughter was visiting him. And this is partially due to the fact that during the inquest, the daily log sheets were unable to be located.
Of course.
It was also unclear as to why the email documentation provided by the daughter was insufficient for the on-duty guards. As no one could explain why that wasn't allowed. The coroner found the corrective services policies and procedures in respect to the end-of-life visits were ad hoc and inadequate. Additionally, the coroner stated that the policy resulted in undue stress to the man's family during a highly emotional time. The coroner found that a system that enables tailored approvals to be given that stay in place for the duration of admission for an inmate at end of life or receiving palliative care is required. It was identified during the inquest that this could be completed easily through their officer integrated management system, or literally could be a document that is physically present with the inmate during their hospitalisation. The coroner noted that if such a system were in place, there would not be a need for guards to check relevant approvals with their senior officer, and it may avoid the gaps in communication, such as which was suffered by this man's family. In response to the man's death and his family's treatment, an investigation was completed by Corrective Services New South Wales. However, at the inquest, the Commissioner of Corrective Services New South Wales was unable to provide the outcome of this investigation, which you think would be something you'd bring to this inquest. Additionally, the Commissioner stated that a trauma-informed training session was now available to staff, but noted that it wasn't mandatory, and nor was the Commissioner able to provide any indication of how many staff had completed it. At the time of the inquest, the Commissioner was considering including liaising with families of inmates who were receiving end-of-life care into the duties of the Senior Service Integrations Officer's role. So essentially just being like, this person who works for us, it would then be their role to deal with these kinds of inmates. In addition to this, the Commissioner stated that they would also contact the Aboriginal Strategy Unit Director to assess if Aboriginal liaison officers could also be involved in this communication with families. But for me, that kind of was like, oh, now they're considering it. It's like, this inquest happened 2.5 years after this gentleman's death. And it kind of, the way it was written in the inquest made it just be like, well, like I might make it someone's problem. And I might contact some other people.
We might consider doing that, but it's not like they've been proactive since this death to do that.
Not at all.
It's only because they're being interviewed at an inquest that they're raising the possibility
that might happen. And again, it might just be the way it was written, but that's the way it came across to me. As it turns out, the Justice Health Network had already confirmed roles of a palliative care Aboriginal health worker and a palliative care social worker to facilitate contact between the Justice Health Network and family members in the event of an inmate receiving palliative care. Therefore, that might negate that need for the corrective services side of it. So, you know, corrective services are kind of getting away with not needing that at this current stage. Corrective Services New South Wales advised at the inquest that they're considering utilisation of a nominated officer to undertake communications and other responsibilities in relation to inmates in end-of-life palliative care. I don't know how that differentiated from the other position that they talked about, but that's what they said. As well as that, the potential development of an end-of-life palliative care document package to be provided to staff. The potential development of separate protocol for guarding inmate patients at end of life or palliative care, and consulting with the Justice Health Network to develop a fact sheet for families relating to inmates receiving end of life or palliative care. So again, that all sounded really positive and beneficial and really important things. But again, it's still 3 years since then and they haven't actually done any of that. And that worries me because then the coroner only went on to make recommendations to state that the corrective services should consider amending the custodial operations policy and procedure to ensure that there's consistency between that procedure and their local operating procedure in relation to end-of-life visits, and amending the same policy and procedure to allow for exceptions concerning prohibitions on giving items to inmates who are receiving end-of-life or palliative care visits. So realistically just saying, well, yeah, you should update your policy about those visits, but didn't say anything more about all of those extra things that the corrective services are maybe considering doing.
Yeah, because normally if the coroner's not making a recommendation, it's because it's already been implemented. But in this case, it's seemingly because they mentioned that they might in the future implement it.
Yeah, so the coroner stated that given these matters in contemplation by corrective services, it makes it unnecessary for many of the recommendations to be made.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah,
no, I don't either.
Again, because of the time that's passed, because we're now how many inquests in, and don't get me wrong, this coroner will be how many inquests in, but we've seen so many where people have been proactive. I mean, like, this happened, so therefore we're going to make change.
Yes.
Does not seem to have happened.
Yep.
For corrective services, and that really disappoints me because I don't think any of that is that hard to implement. To put in a procedure for end-of-life care to say these people are entitled to a dignified death, they are at end of life, we should allow some changes to policy in that specific instance.
Yep.
In order to make that a pleasant process for everyone involved. That I don't see the argument for why that hasn't happened yet.
Yep.
You know, were they waiting for this inquest? What were they expecting the outcome of the inquest to be? They know that the care was suboptimal. They know that the communication was suboptimal. They've done an internal investigation, although don't know what the outcome of that was. So, like, you'd think that someone there should just be a little bit proactive in that. And I'm disappointed that they weren't.
Yep.
So that's my case for today.
Thank you for making me really angry.
Yeah, that's how I felt writing this. So
yeah, like it's. I think it's a good one to cover because you're right. It does go into the what rights does a person in remand have when it comes to their healthcare.
And it also makes me wonder, because I generally don't read coroner's cases where a person is in custody. I wonder if this is not an uncommon sort of situation to happen.
I haven't read many of the in custodies because they tend to be, because they're mandatory.
They're often natural causes,
deaths,
which this one was.
Yeah, true. And so they often don't have a lot of recommendations or don't have a lot to discuss. And so, I haven't found many others like this, but it makes me wonder. So, very, very interesting and very, very sad for this family. I'm very disappointed by this one. So on that note, we'll finish up the episode and see you again next time.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.